Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, I wanted to try something a little bit new. Recently I've been doing two separate series on this channel. The Ask Perky series, where you guys write in with any questions you might have and I do my best to answer them for you. And also the Viewers Request series. So if you want to know what a certain guitar into a certain amp sounds like, or a certain pairing of pedals or anything like that, I'll try to show you that in the Viewers Requests videos. Now I'm absolutely going to carry on doing those two series going forward because they're a lot of fun to do and you guys seem to really like them in terms of the figures. But I'm going to try something a little bit new today, so let me know in the comments underneath whether you like this new format. At the end of every month, I'm going to trawl through all the comments that have come in on this channel during the previous month, choose the 10 or 12 most interesting ones, and just do a sort of quick fire Q&A answering those questions in a standalone video. Now I've tried to answer all of these questions to you individually in the relevant comment sections, but I thought it might just be an interesting example at the end of every month to talk about what comments and questions have been coming in during the previous 4 weeks. So as I said, I'm going to try all this today. Let me know in the comments what you think of this format and if you have any questions for next month. But I've got your questions printed out here, so let's just get straight into them. Bishwarup Bora asks, can I reverse install a righty Telecaster bridge to a left-handed one? Now, when it comes to the telly, which I've got here, I've made a video before about left-handed guitar electronics and when you need to know about that if you're a lefty and when you don't, and when you need to concern yourself with it. Now, when it comes to the bridge on a telly, in my experience, the actual mounting of the bridge to the body, all the fixings tend to be fairly symmetrical. It tends to be 4 screws underneath the saddles and they're kind of equidistant from each other. So in theory, you could attach a right-handed bridge to a lefty telly, no problem at all. But there's 2 things you need to bear in mind about this. Firstly, the saddles. If you have kind of vintage style saddles where they're just completely straight blocks of copper with grooves running over them and there's no compensation there, then yes, theoretically you might have to switch the 2 outside pairs around so that the grooves are the right size for the wound and thinner strings. But in theory you could do that. But if you have compensated saddles like I have here, these are the Callahan saddles on a Callahan bridge, then you can't just flip them over because then the compensation won't be right. For each pair it will be the wrong way round for the relevant strings. So you need to bear that in mind. You should probably get some lefty compensated saddles even if using a right-handed bridge. But the most important thing to remember is the pickup. Now on a telly it's angled so that the on the treble side it's closer to the bridge and on the wound side it's further away. So that's the angle on the telly bridge. Now if you install a righty bridge, that's going to be the other way around and it's going to be angled so that the high E side is further away from the saddles and the wound side is closer, and that will change how your guitar sounds. And also it very much depends on exactly which telly you have as to whether underneath the bridge the routing will accept the pickup at a different angle. So you need to bear that in mind because having that angle different will change how your guitar sounds. It might not necessarily be better or worse, it will be different though. So you need to bear that in mind. For the cost of what you can get sort of the cheaper left-handed telly bridges for, I would absolutely recommend fitting a proper lefty bridge for the price. I wouldn't worry too much about trying to get hold of a righty and see if you can install it backwards and then reroute the guitar to accept the pickup at a different angle. I personally wouldn't get into that. You theoretically could do it, but just buy a lefty bridge. So next, E.T. phone home. You obviously live in the UK. Is it possible for you to go visiting and maybe interviewing some manufacturers and or developers in the UK? Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I have thought about doing before. And I've spoken to a few manufacturers about maybe going to chat to them a year or 2 ago. Now there's 2 things that have stopped me doing that currently. Firstly, logistics, getting different batteries for my cameras, working out how to record the audio in the field, because obviously I use a Mac with an interface, couldn't realistically use that live, as in kind of if I was doing an interview not here. So that would have to be taken into account. I'd probably have to get like a standalone audio recorder, maybe invest in a couple of the sort of the clip mics that people wear on their collars, things like that, and work out camera angles, maybe get new tripods. So there's a lot of expense and logistics that might not be immediately obvious in that. But also, fairly obviously, in 2020, the whole coronavirus thing, The UK is in kind of different tiers of lockdown all around the country. So where I live in North Somerset, we're in the lowest tier, so we can mix in groups of 6 and go inside buildings. In other places, you're not allowed any mixing in or outdoors and all that sort of stuff. So this year just isn't the appropriate time to be trying to put that together. And yes, I could do it on Zoom or Skype, but to be honest, I bloody hate web chat things. I would much rather go out and see the people in person. I would love to go up to Yorkshire to see Fane speakers and look at their factory and how they make their speakers and talk to them about that, for example. At the moment, Yorkshire is very much locked down, more so than I am here. So it's just not realistic or sensible to be doing that in 2020. As and when the restrictions are kind of relaxed in the next however many years that takes, then yes, it's absolutely something I want to look into doing. I'd love to go to see Matt at Monty's Pickups in London to talk about winding pickups. I'd love to go and see Nick Williams talk about fuzz pedals, as I said, Fane speakers. There's loads of people I would love to get out in the field and talk to. It's definitely something I'm looking at, but just not right now. Kira Barsmith, that's a nice crunch, great demo. I think that was in response to this here, the Past Effects preamp crunch. I have a question for Ask Perky, if you don't mind, and that's, do you have an interest in owning a tape delay? And if so, which one would you choose? I've never played the tape delay, but I would absolutely love to. Now, there's a couple of things that have put me off historically. First is price, and it seems it almost doesn't matter if you go vintage or modern. I think like the full tone tube tape Echo sells for a similar price new than you would pay for like an old EP2 or EP3. They are very, very expensive unit tape delays. And yeah, that's always kind of put me off a little bit because I buy pretty much everything I use here second hand, and you know, running a YouTube channel this size it's not exactly like a retirement fund. So I do have to be careful with what I invest in and whenever I do that. I'd love to try one, but I've been put off on price alone, to be honest. But the other thing is there's a lot of mechanical moving parts in a tape delay, and you'd have to replace the tape spools and their motors can die and whatever. I'm not technically minded and I'm not very good at fixing things. So with like a transistor-based overdrive pedal, I know people I can send that to and they can fix it up easily and inexpensively. When it comes to mechanical moving parts and complex units and whatever, I tend to stay away from that sort of stuff just because I'm not knowledgeable about it, and I couldn't have a go at fixing it if it went wrong. So on price and just logistics alone, I've tended to stay away from them. I would love to try one though. If I were to choose one, the full tone tube tape Echo sounds really nice. The Echo Fix, especially now they're putting a proper spring reverb in there rather than the DSP reverb, looks really nice. But again, they're like £1,000 or more. So it would need to be a serious sort of planned investment if I were to ever go down that route. I would love to one day though. Right, so do-it-yourself musician. Cool pedal, but it's interesting that Triangulo Lab in Italy has been making a pedal called the Ensemble Crunch since 2017. This one looks eerily similar, and that's in response to the Past Effects preamp crunch again. Now, yeah, they're very similar concepts. I am aware of Triangulo Labs. I've never tried out any of their pedals, primarily because there's a massive waiting list for pretty much everything they make. But yeah, this is a very, very similar concept to that Ensemble Crunch. Now, there's two things, as far as I'm aware, that are different about this pedal. Firstly, this ups the voltage internally to 14 volts, whereas I believe, and you might be able to correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe the Triangulo Labs runs just at 9 volts internally. It doesn't up the voltage, whereas this ups it to 14 volts, which is correct to the original CE1 preamp, runs at 14 volts inside that. So I think it's technically more correct in that sense. But the other thing that the Past Effects really has going for it is this switchable buffer. If you've seen my video before about the CE1, you'll know that it was designed for keyboards, has a very low valued pot on the preamp, and if you plug a high impedance guitar signal into it, that pot will take off all your high end. So you can solve that either by modding the pedal and putting a higher valued pot in, more suited to guitars, or you can run a buffered pedal in line before it, or put a pedal that's on before it in line. You don't have to worry about this with the Past Effects. It does have that low value pot, so the dark sound is there if you want it, but it has the switchable buffer, so you can just pop it on and you never have to worry about what you're running before it. It sounds amazing regardless of the situation. So that's two differences between them, but yeah, they are essentially the same concept of having the CE1 preamp in a box. So, David Lewington, there's a big comment here, but the bit I wanted to address was, where are we here? One part, not so sure I agree with. Yes, Pre-16 may be more authentic from a point of who crafted the guitar. However, Heritage did have some QC issues over the years. I know, as I've had more than a few since the 80s, and many players have said the same. In the last few years, the QC has improved greatly, still made the same way, and those who do build have apprenticed from the originals. In short, they're all good, and I wouldn't discount any built past 2016. Now, that is in relation to this guitar here, my beautiful Heritage H535. Now, that is in response to a comment I made in the original demo of this guitar, which was how, as of 2016, the 4 original Gibson guys who owned the Heritage and built all these guitars by hand and everything, sold the company, at least in part, to a big conglomerate. Now, when I said it's a bit sad that that's happened, it wasn't so much in response to the new owners, it was more in response to the fact that the original Gibson guys aren't there anymore, because they're old more than anything. You know, they were building guitars back in the 50s, so they're a really good age nowadays. So that's all I really meant by that. You know, these guitars are still made exactly the same way. You do see talks on forums about how the luthiers have been got rid of and being replaced by CNC machines. As far as I'm aware, there's no basis to that at all. I think that's just kind of hearsay. I've never heard anyone confirm that that has actually happened. I think it's just talk that happens on forums. But yeah, I mean, this is a stunning guitar. The only thing I would say about the post-2016 Heritage guitars is the ones I've seen seem to have a slightly more plain top to this one. I don't know if you can see, but in certain lights it just explodes. It has a gorgeous flame to it, and it's quite an elaborate piece of wood on the top of this guitar. Now, the ones I've seen come up second hand and also new on the Heritage website, they seem to have slightly more plain tops, which are arguably more true to the original Gibsons, because back in the 50s, these 335s didn't tend to have particularly flamey tops. They were more plain. But that seems to be one difference that I've spotted since that takeover has happened. Anything else that's happened behind closed doors, I don't really know. You hear things spoken on forums. But yeah, I'm not saying current production Heritage guitars are bad and you should avoid them whatsoever. I believe they're still made in exactly the same way, same old machinery. I think they're doing up 225 Parsons Street at the moment, so the factories are all kind of being moved around a little bit. But yeah, Heritage guitars are absolutely stunning, and I cannot recommend them highly enough based on this. And especially now I've swapped out the pickups and changed the hardware, which you guys haven't seen yet. That video is coming in a couple of weeks. This guitar is just one of the best sounding guitars I own now. It's absolutely amazing. So, Mark Wright, sweet guitar man, again in response to the Heritage. I've always wondered why Gibson didn't try and buy the Heritage company. With all their custom shop stuff Gibson do these days, making on all the old machines again, people would be falling over themselves to get one. Yeah, absolutely. Why they haven't done that, I'm not sure. There might be a bit of professional pride in there, in the fact that it is Gibson's old Kalamazoo factory and they don't want to be going back to Heritage trying to kind of get back in with them when they parted ways. That might be something to do with it, I don't know. But yeah, given what people pay for like pickups wound on old winding machines and things like that, yeah, the heritage, no pun intended, of that guitar is all there. It's arguably the most accurate and authentic kind of 5960 335 reissue that is possible to get, being made by those old boys on the old machinery. So yeah, I'm surprised Gibson haven't tried to sort of get back more into it. There may be sort of professional pride, or the fact they think the way they do things nowadays at Gibson is better than what Heritage do. I don't know. But yeah, I'm surprised with that too. I think they could really be onto something if they did that. Chris Killian. Ask Perkins, assuming you already have one of each, what's a better buy? Another amazing guitar or another amazing amp? Now this was a really interesting one, because I've often thought that if I would personally rather put a cheap guitar into a posh amp rather than a posh guitar into a cheap amp. You know, I would much rather have like a £200 Epiphone Les Paul going into my Dr. Z Z-Rec, for example, rather than have a 59 reissue Les Paul going into a little 200 quid transistor practice amp, because the amp is where the vast majority of the work is done, and cheaper guitars I think sound much better than cheaper amps. You can get some really good sounds out of cheaper guitars. I'm sure you can with cheaper amps as well. But I had Epiphone Les Pauls back in the day, and they sounded really cool. The playability of those guitars was outstanding. And I think especially if you upgraded the electronics slightly, maybe put some different pickups in there, they could sound absolutely magic. So I would much rather put a cheap guitar into a posh amp than the other way around. Now, if you already have one amazing guitar and one amazing amp, I think it kind of depends what you want to achieve. If you're after a very, very different sound, I'd probably go with the amp. If the difference between a Vox amp and an Orange amp, for example, or a Marshall amp and a Fender amp, assuming you're not using the really old circuits where Marshalls were derived from Fenders, then yeah, you can get some very, very different sounds. And also you could pair the amps together, which is just amazing. It's not always practical, but it sounds great. But if you are wanting to play a completely different style of music, it could be worth looking into guitars as well. So depending on what guitar you have, if you have a Les Paul, maybe go single coil. If you have a Strat, maybe go Les Paul. If you've got a Telly, you can do most things with a Telly, so maybe do a bit of a curveball, go for a 335 semi-acoustic or something. It completely depends what you're trying to achieve. If you want to play a completely different style of music, if you want to go for different types of gain, I personally am not hugely wild about the sound of a Strat with heavy gain. Some people get amazing sounds out of it, it's just not really what I'm into. But then I would much rather use a Strat for clean sounds than a high output Les Paul. So it completely depends what you want to achieve. And ultimately just buy the gear that you feel good playing. When it comes to guitars, what guitar does your hero play? Probably go for that if you haven't got that guitar already. You really need to resonate with an instrument, and there's no better way to do that, which is really hard for me being lefty, and also very hard in 2020. But go to a guitar shop and just try guitars out, try amps out, see what really resonates with you and what you're into. If you're looking at amps, take your guitar along and plug it into the amp to see how that amp sounds with your guitar. It's the only way to really know. But if you're going second hand, go on eBay. As long as you buy sensibly, or Reverb, as long as you buy sensibly, you can generally sell things on without losing much money, if any at all. So that can be a good way to kind of experiment. If you're not sure exactly what you want, buy second hand and you can punt it out and try something else if you don't like it. Nimrodian. Sounds awesome and definitely has that bite. I think that was in response to putting the TV Jones T Armands in my Gretsch. I am wondering, what are the strings and their gauges? 11 on top? These are the strings I use. I used Ernie balls when I was a kid, but to me, Ernie balls, they tend to die quite quickly. I don't know whether it's just I have particularly acidic sweat or something, I don't know, but they seem to tarnish quite quickly. So I moved to D'Addarios, which I preferred, but about a year and a half ago, I moved to using these, which are new tone strings. These are handmade in the UK, and these are a custom gauge for me. You can probably see what the gauges are on the front there. So these are a custom gauge for me. They're a very heavy gauge. They go from 12 to 64. And as I said, you can go on the Newtone website and you can spec out your own custom gauge of string. You can choose material, you can choose hex core or round core. You can choose the gauge, the material the strings are made out of, absolutely everything, which sounds very elaborate and posh, but these only run about £1 more per set than an off-the-shelf set of D'Addarios would. So they're amazing value for money. You can really fine-tune your sound and the feel of an instrument. So these are very much a sort of hybrid set. They're kind of heavy on the top, but super heavy on the bottom, because it's got a 64 low E, and I play in standard. So they're a very, very heavy gauge of string. So that, every guitar you've heard on this channel for the last 18 months has been done using Newtone strings. I like heavy strings. I can't play thin strings. And I should also say at this point, I think the only thing that matters when it comes to the whole thick strings sound better than thin strings debate, the only thing that matters is you feel comfortable playing. Any tonal differences can realistically be accounted for by just nudging the low end on your amp up if you're using thin strings, maybe tone the treble up if you're using thick strings. Tonal differences can largely be accounted for, but being comfortable and getting the most out of yourself as a player by just using the right strings for you can't be. So that's the most important thing when it comes to choosing a string gauge. Clontart. I recently replaced the mud switch on a Jet with a no-load tone pot. Fits right in there and works really well. And I thought this was a really interesting idea because what they are referring to is this switch on a Gretsch guitar here, which is the tone switch, but it's often called the mud switch, because essentially what it is two fixed capacitors. So if you flick the switch down, it's the same as having that capacitor in something like a Les Paul, but with the tone rolled all the way off. So it's really dark, and using the values that have historically been used in Jets, it's completely unusable, hence why it's been called the mud switch. So I modded this to put some really, really low value capacitors in. So putting the switch down, it essentially sounds to me like going between the 1 meg pots that are in here to 500k pots. Barely makes a difference, but just takes a tiny bit of that glassiness off the top end. Now, what I thought was really interesting about this comment was these guitars typically don't have tone controls, at least in their vintage configuration. You can get the Player's Edition Gretches where you don't have the mud switch, but you have a tone control as well as a master volume and whatever. But by the sound of it, the hole that this switch mounts into is exactly the right size for a pot. So what they've done is they've replaced this switch with a tone pot, which, given its position in the signal chain, will work on both pickups regardless of selection and after the individual volumes. But it's a really cool idea if you want to have a tone knob on the Gretsch, but you want to kind of keep it largely stock. Swapping out that switch for a tone knob, especially a no-load pot, so you can click it so it's completely out of the light and then bring it in when you want to darken the guitar, would work really well. I've never come across that being done, so I thought that was a really interesting idea. So, Will Webster, I have you cranked up in my room and it sounds like your amp is here. Now, this comment made me really happy because that's ultimately what I want to achieve in all of my videos. I want to give you guys the most accurate representation coming out of your speakers or earbuds or whatever that I'm hearing in this room with my amps. So that's what I'm always trying to achieve. So when somebody says that it just sounds like I'm there in the room with them, that makes me so happy because that is what I'm all about on this channel, is giving you the most accurate depiction I possibly can of how a piece of gear sounds in this room. And I always try to get that sound coming out of your speakers in its most pure form, so it just sounds exactly like what I was hearing sat here. So that comment made me very, very happy. Thank you very much, Will Webster. Drum and Strum. Sounds amazing. Clarity is everything with me. I think this is also in response to the T-Armans and the Gretsch. Any chance you've ever gone on a clarity journey with a Strat? I can't seem to crack mine. Yeah, I struggled with a Strat for a while as well. And I've got my one here. Two things that really helped in this, well, three things I suppose. One, a really good set of pickups. These are the Lindy Fraulein Real 54s with the Alnico 3 magnets. The Alnico 3 does have a little bit more sweetness in the top end than the Alnico 5s that are in here before. The Callahan bridge assembly, and it's got the full like trem block and springs and claw and everything, that added a bit more clarity too. I don't know what material that's actually made out of, whether it's vintage correct or not, I don't know, but that did seem to improve the note definition and clarity a little bit. But the most important thing that I've done to this guitar is put VI pots in. Now I use these in all of my guitars. I love clarity in my guitars too, but they're slightly overvalued. They're 10% over what the stock typical value would be. So they are 550k pots rather than 500s and 280k rather than 250. Now in this guitar, I've got the 280k in the volume and the neck tone, but I, like many other people, wire the bottom tone to the bridge pickup so you can darken it and make it sound a little bit more humbuckery to when you really want to add some gain on there. But because wiring the tone pot to the bridge pickup did darken it slightly, I use a 550k pot for the bottom tone knob. Now I know people like Eric Johnson, I think, uses a 500k pot for his master volume. That will add a lot of clarity too. So I would definitely experiment with pot values before anything else. But if you want to really change your guitar and spend a bit more money on it, you can upgrade the hardware and the pickups too. But you know, also raising the pickup height towards a string will give you a little bit more sort of zingy high end. That could be worth looking into. So a good setup and maybe just changing out the electronics can really help, but you can go further with that if you absolutely need to. But yeah, I'm all about clarity in my guitars too, so I'm generally been on that journey with pretty much every guitar I own. Psychotic horse meat, normal. Two comments here on both my Celestion speaker demos. Timestamps, amateur. I said timestamps, but we'll gloss over that. And then, seriously dude, still no real timestamps. Now, I like timestamps in videos so you can easily navigate, I totally get that. But on those speaker demos, I'm basically changing between different speakers and different pedals and guitars about every 7 or 8 seconds. So if I were to put a timestamp in that video to every single change, there would be about 200 timestamps in each video, because those are like 25 minutes long, both of those videos. So yes, I like timestamps, but sorry, Psychotic Horse Meat, I don't think they're appropriate in that video because it would just be so over the top and it would be more confusing than anything else. Just flick through, it's very obvious what's happening on screen in those speaker swaps. JJ Mayer, Effectrode is audiophile heaven. That's talking about this pedal here, the Fire Bottle, and yeah, every Effectrode pedal I've ever played is just outstanding. Chewbie Goodness, I'm learning to pronounce it properly. Yeah, absolutely. It was one thing that really surprises me doing this channel is just how angry some people get that, like, different accents exist and people all around the world will pronounce things slightly differently to how they might pronounce it. It's amazing some of the abuse that comes on this channel if I pronounce something wrong in someone's eyes. Like, here in England, I say tube. In America, you say tube. Over there, you say aluminum. I say aluminium, because that's how it's spelt. Like Lindy Fralin pickups as opposed to Lindy Frailin pickups and things like that. It's amazing how angry some people get that, like, national accents exist. It's really surprising. But yes, Chewbie Goodness is how I would say it in the UK. And finally, Cool Pedal. You look a bit peaky. Hope you are well. Well, I should say that this room I film in is very, very small. And it was a lot worse in here a few years ago, but it gets incredibly hot in this room because to shoot a video, especially with loud guitar amps, I have to have the door shut and the window shut. So there's no air in here whatsoever. I've got a Mac behind me, I've got 2 tube amps kicking out a load of heat. And until last year, the 10 lights on the roof in here were those like real old school halogen bulbs, and they got white hot. Literally, if you brushed your finger against it when it was on, you would just dissolve your skin on your finger. They were so unbelievably hot. So I was literally being baked in this room. Now it's a little bit nicer now that I use the sort of LED energy saver bulbs in here. But if it's hot outside, it's hot in here to start with. So with the door and the window shut and the amps going, it gets unbelievably hot in here. Now it's the end of October now, and it's a little bit cooler, but it's still pretty warm in this room. And yeah, and also using the new film lights I've got, they light up my face, and a higher resolution camera also generally makes you look quite shiny. So yeah, I do tend to look a little bit hot and sweaty in here because I am. So yes, I'm absolutely fine. But if you see me kind of looking a bit red and sweaty, it's generally because this room is an absolute oven. So there we are, folks, the comments and questions from October. As I said, if you have any more, drop them in the comments underneath for November and I'll try to answer them. But keep commenting on all the videos. I do read every comment that comes in, and I'll try to get back to you in person. But if it's a particularly interesting or valuable question, I'll include it in the Q&A at the end of November. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. Let me know in the comments what you think of this new format as well. I think it works, but obviously it's over to you guys too. And please do carry on subscribing to this channel. It really does make a huge difference when you do that. So thank you, folks, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.